Ladies and gentlemen, it is such a privilege for me to welcome here on the Future Female Forward stage Jenny Johnson, the global CEO of Franklin Templeton, one of the world's largest asset managers. What is it, $1.5 trillion of assets under management?
1.6 now.
$1.6 trillion of assets under management. What a phenomenal feat that is. Jenny, it's so good to have you here. You know, I remember watching you speak, I think it was during the COVID period, or just before the COVID period, and you were asked the question, Jenny, that when you walk into a room, did you walk in feeling, well, at the start of your career, did you walk in feeling that your ideas and your views and your insights were going to be discounted anyway? So what was the point of opening up and speaking up? And I remember you said very clearly that you never let that thought into your mind. I want to understand from you, how did that happen?
So the question was asked to me by, it was a new college student. We have a program called our Futures program, and a woman said to me, what do you do when you walk in the room and you know that the men in the room are going to discount what you say and what you think? And I said, wow, I've never actually walked in the room and thought that. And as you say that, my message to you is you should never think that either. It doesn't matter if they're going to waste their mind share on such a useless thought, but your mind share should be focused on whatever it is that you're in the room for. And I think that's really true. Like, I mean, we don't know what's in other people's heads and the biases that other people have.
But they do have them.
Sure, and they're going to have, and later, and I share experience when I was becoming CEO of something that happened to me that kind of woke me up a little bit to that more. But
tell us that story. Well, what happened then?
But in the end, it doesn't do you any good,
yeah,
right, taking your mind share. And the story that happened to me is, as I was, the company was struggling a little bit, and we were going to do a big acquisition that was of a company called Legg Mason that was going to double the size. And so they were thinking about moving me into the CEO role. And I had done a Spencer Stuart study where one of the features that came out was that I had exceptional followership in the firm. I've been with Franklin Templeton for 33 years, and I had exceptional followership. Fast forward a few months later, we're going to do this acquisition, and some of the board members were nervous about changing the CEO, and one of them said to me, Jenny, how do you feel about being CEO of this combined company? And I said, you know, I think it's a really difficult time in the asset management industry, but I am highly motivated and very excited. I have a lot of ideas of things that we can do. And so I walked out with my CFO, and he said, great answer, showed strength. And then I got a phone call that I had created a gender divide in the board. I had created the gender divide because the women liked my answer, but some of the men felt like I wasn't really a team player, because I should have said, I'm really excited to work with the executive chairman, Greg Johnson, and I'm excited to work with the CFO, Matt Nichols. And what was crazy about that is they were genuinely trying to do what's right for the company. I don't think anybody had a conscious bias around it. But one is, I'm pretty sure there wasn't a man who was going to answer the question that way. And two, that it was suddenly my issue. And they had this data point that I had exceptional followership, and you don't usually get followership unless you're a team player. So it was one that was really kind of personal around, and I had to sort of work through that with the board around the biases that can happen. But also, great message on why it's so important, if we're going to have more women CEOs, that we have more women on boards, because there can be a certain connection that becomes important.
You know, that's very important that you brought up those two issues. I want to understand from you, Jenny, why do you believe we don't have enough women? I mean, there's barely a handful of women running financial services companies globally. I mean, Citi has just about managed to get a woman, you know, at the top. EY has managed to get a woman at the top. Why is it that we still have so few women in leadership roles across global companies?
You know, I don't think there's any easy answer to it. You know, look at my career started 34 years ago. So you have to look at the pipeline back then and what was going on, and it was certainly different. I was fortunate. My mother had 7 children and then went back to Stanford Medical School and became a doctor. That was pretty unusual. There were only 10 women at Stanford at the time that she was there. So I feel like I was really fortunate to have this role model. But the pipeline's really important. And so number one is you have to get the pipeline of women into the system to be able to promote. And two, we can ask ourselves, there's a whole bunch of reasons why women fall out along the way. And I think we need to understand those. Again, I actually also think in the finance business, I was reminded by my daughter when I asked the question. I have 5 kids, 3 daughters, and I said, hey, are any of you going to join me in this business? And one of my daughters said, no, Mom, I want to do something that helps people. But it was a really enlightening moment because I thought, we've got to describe this business in such a way. I'm like, we help people all the time. We help people with most, important goals in their lives, but we don't describe it that way. And then if we can start to describe these careers in a way that resonate with women, then we're going to attract more women into it.
Well, 5 children, and you're the global CEO of Franklin Templeton. How does that happen?
I probably missed a few things along the way. Well, actually, people ask me, one of the things, again, I think I was fortunate to have a mom who was such an amazing achiever. She's still alive today at 88. I think that the way I looked at things is I'd look at my life, and if I felt a conflict between something personal and something with work, I'd try to think 5 years from now and say, when I look back, which of these things is going to be more important? And often you got clarity around whatever that home thing was or whether that work mattered. And I tried to kind of have that drive me.
Well, that's very good life advice that you've just shared with us, because very often when we are making these conflicting decisions and the guilt, I mean, do you suffer from the sort of mom guilt, the wife guilt, the CEO guilt? Because this is the conversation that I've had practically every female CEO, and I mean, it was Indira Nui who told me, she said, if I could make a T-shirt that would say, I'm guilty, I would make a T-shirt that said, I'm guilty. Is that something that you've dealt with as well?
And trust me, your kids know that that's a way to get to you. So they will use it in any way they can. Yes, of course. But again, I always said I'm a second-generation guilty mom. I do think as people have a mom that works, they're going to, and have a good relationship where they're going to be understanding. But we're also a role model to our children, and so both to girls and boys. And so I always looked at it and said, one is I'm providing that kind of role model. And by the way, I want to be clear here. I always say to people, look, the great opportunity for women is that we get to choose whether we want to work at home in a full-time, because I got to be honest, there are a lot of times I was on maternity leave where I was like, I need to get back to the office so I can get a rest. But it's that choice that's so important, and that's what I think we're striving for, is to have that choice.
I want to now talk to you about what you talked about, the leaky pipeline, and what you've been able to do at Franklin Templeton to ensure that you actually build out that pipeline, that you retain women, that you ensure that women get to leadership positions. Is there anything specific that you've done as CEO that you believe has worked, or that's different from your predecessors?
I don't know. I think part of it is you're a product of your times. And so, it is a time where this conversation is happening much more, and so there's a lot more opportunity. But I think look, in the end, if you want outcomes, you better be data-driven. And so one is, what are you getting in your pipeline? And if you're just going to recruit from the same schools in the same ways, you're not going to change your pipeline. So we found, recruiting from different schools, we found that a job description, depending on the language you use in a job description, it will attract women or not. Policies, your HR policies are really important. I actually do think this more flexibility where you can work from home some of the time or work on your own hours at some of the time plays to women's strength, because we know that women spend more time on home activities. We have to understand why they fall out of the pipeline along the way, or why for every 100 men promoted, only 87 women are promoted, right? So that immediately, and you got to really understand those choke points, and then as a firm, improve on them. And for the men in the crowd, one of the best things that you can do to help women is to actually sometime as a leader in your firm say, hey, I've got to leave the office today because I'm going to go take my daughter to the doctor.
Yeah.
Right? Because then you normalize a behavior that often is put on women, and it makes it acceptable. It doesn't matter what your HR policies are if your leading males who are setting the standard don't actually act on some of those HR policies. So that's a really important point to be able to talk about.
Jenny, since you talked about hybrid work and you talked about having the flexibility at work in terms of the hours, whether you go into work or, through COVID, we heard that this is never going to be the same again, that we're never going to go back to work. It's going to be flexible, it's going to be hybrid, and suddenly you now have a lot of your male colleagues saying, hey, no way, come back to office or you get the boot. And that seems to be now the sort of dominant conversation, the dominant diktat. How do you see this?
So, believe me, there's a lot of debate in the firm on this topic. Look, I am a believer, and, Franklin Templeton has offices in 35 countries, over 100 offices. We don't have a meeting without somebody being on a video, right? It's just, by the nature, we're very dispersed as a company. And so we actually, pre-COVID, created an environment where you had people on video. I talk to colleagues who I work with who say, I have to have my team in every day. And then I will ask the question, okay, so, if you live in New York City, probably if you live in Delhi or Mumbai, you can end up easily traveling an hour to commute to work, sometimes an hour and a half. That's 2 to 3 hours a day that you are asking your employees to not be with their family, not to take care of themselves and work out. So if they're going to make that trip, then you better make sure that their time in the office is valuable. Because if they're going to sit in a cubicle and interface with just people not connecting through meetings or things, they're going to question your judgment of making them come in. And so we're really focused on, one, trying to create some amount of flexibility, but, it's also important that you do get to know your colleagues, and so you do come in 2 to 3 days a week. And, by the way, if a particular week requires 5 days, we want that too. But we're also going to be respectful that if you need to leave because of something, and it can be accommodated in your work, we're going to try to do that. And I think, ultimately, this is going to show up in people's turnover numbers, right? Either you're going to have those who are more flexible, not getting the same kind of financial results, and you'll look at it and say, I need to pull people in more, or you're going to say, wow, these companies that are requiring more restrictive policies on coming in the office are having higher turnover. I think the jury's still out. I don't think we know this one yet, and I think it's going to be really important to keep our eye on it.
Yes, I think that this is still work in progress, and a lot of people are grappling with what the right answer to this is going to be. But Jenny, you're here in India. You've been a long-term observer of India. In fact, I don't know how many of you know this, but Jenny spent 6 months here in India. At this time, you believe that it's different. Jenny, it feels different, the India story to you. Why is that?
Well, I always laughed because the most skeptical people about India were Indians, okay? They would always tell you, I'd be like, oh my gosh, it's a country with 56% of the population under the age of 25, great education system, there's so much opportunity here. And they'd be like, yeah, no, they're going to mess it up. We're going to mess it up. For the first time, and it was really a year ago, it was palpable, the feeling of excitement and genuine belief in opportunity that I think that India feels. I genuinely believe that this is India's decade. And there's a bunch of reasons why that is. So not only are those key sort of within country, but you have a world that is shifting supply chains. So because of the India-China relationship, because of people seeing during COVID, the China +1 supply chains can be really important. So when supply chains are moving, that's an opportunity to capture, right? So India has a natural opportunity to do that. There's a real desire to improve people from poverty and jobs like manufacturing. And so if you get the corporate policies and the government policies right, you're going to be able to track that, and you already see that happening. So I think there's a convergence of a lot of things. You have a government that's trying to be very organized in their economic policies. And so as those things are, the convergence of all those things feels like it's really India's time.
Well, this could be India's decade. Jenny Johnson, thanks very much for that vote of confidence. But, you know, Jenny, I also want to understand from you, and since we were talking about data, what is the data telling you about women investing in the markets? I mean, we've seen that story take off significantly here in India. Of course, we're still scratching the surface in general. But what are the global trends at this point in time telling you about women and the markets?
Well, so they claim that women are actually better investors, partly because they stay in the market and they're less emotional about the market, which is kind of funny.
Considering that's something that we're always beat with, right?
That's right. You know, here's a statistic that I often use, and I don't fully understand why it remains so bad, but less than 2% of U.S. venture capital money goes to female entrepreneurs. Yeah. And the female entrepreneurs that actually got money have twice the return of the average venture capital fund. Yeah. Now, 57% of the women who are turned down say, I was turned down because the venture capitalists didn't understand my business case. They didn't understand what I was trying to do. And only 12% of VCs are women. So my conclusion there is that well, I'll give you two examples that made it kind of resonate. We invested in a company called Rent the Runway. Yeah. In Rent the Runway, you literally can rent a designer gown for an event. And there's a lot of pressure for women not to wear, I don't know what it's like in India, but in the U.S. to wear the same gown.
It's on steroids. It's on steroids here, I assure you.
So it's really expensive to try to keep up with that. So this concept of renting the runway, and then I was thinking about, I just imagine you're pitching this idea of we're gonna rent out these designer dresses, and you're pitching it to a bunch of venture capitalists who all are wearing the same tuxedo that they've had for 20 years, right? You can see how that's gonna not resonate with folks. Yeah. And so, you know, one is we have to get capital out to these underrepresented groups. It's the only way that society, people will feel like the opportunity is fair. Right? It doesn't mean it's equal outcomes, it's about equal opportunity. And therefore, I genuinely believe you need a diverse group in your investment team, frankly, to get the best investments, because you're going to see opportunities other teams who aren't as diverse are going to miss, and it's going to be better for everybody with that. So that's my thinking about women.
Are you looking at backing women entrepreneurs here in India? We've got a whole bunch of them here in this room, and they'd be delighted to hear what you have to say. Are you going to be, the applause tells you the story, are you going to be backing female entrepreneurship in India?
We actually have a female venture fund in the U.S. that just invests in, it's run by women VCs and invests in female entrepreneurs. So maybe we need to extend it here.
You most certainly need to extend it here. There's plenty of opportunity. But Jenny, before I let you go, the single piece of advice, or the best piece of advice that you got, whether it was your mom or a mentor or somebody else, and the piece of advice that you leave your daughters with?
I guess I'm going to say, well, people ask me about leadership. It's not exactly advice, but it's my view on leadership, which is what I now give to others, and I think I collected from my parents. And I call it the 4 Ps: people, passion, purpose, and persistence. People, surround yourself with great leaders, great people. You know, as a CEO, you're only as good as your team, and then their team and on down. Passion, love what you do, and you don't feel like you're working ever if you really love what you do. And I have a caveat now, since my daughters are singer, actress, and documentary filmmaker, and it needs to support you. I forgot to say that at the time, so there's the little questionable there. But that's the passion. Purpose, to talk about your business in a purposeful way. At Franklin Templeton, we help people achieve the most important goals of their life, and that enables people to be passionate about following you on that. And then persistence. You are going to have trouble at times, and it is all about how you dust yourself off, get back up, and get back into the game.
Jenny Johnson, an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much. People, passion, persistence and purpose. The 4 Ps here from Jenny Johnson. We wish you the very best of luck and appreciate you joining us here on the Future Female Forward stage. We look forward to having you back in India since you do believe that this is going to be our decade. Jenny, many thanks indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause.